Hey everybody, this is Dark Guardsman. We're back with another video. So my job interview got pushed back from 11 to 2, so we've got about roughly an hour, a little bit more, to do a really quick video. I was thinking about streaming this, but I was like, you know what, we'll make a recording and we'll do it that way, and I can show the entire process of how to make a mod for 112 featuring a entity and a couple items. This very likely will be done in multiple parts because, well, frankly, there's definitely not a way I'm getting this done in an hour unless I push it and not explain anything we're doing. So I haven't made a single thing for this mod yet, but I do have models for it, so at least we don't have to go through doing that part. So what we're actually going to be making, let me actually go in here and I'm going to zoom up here because it's in the channel here. We're going to be making this little guy. So M1 here made this, I don't remember why he made this, but we were talking about it. It's a little remote controlled shooting drum. Now we're not going to actually make it remote controlled. What we're going to do is we're going to take basically the same behavioral logic of a wolf and just make it shoot ranged weapons. So it's going to follow the player around, and when it's not following the player around, it'll have two modes. It'll be completely stationary, or it'll do a slight little patrol where it'll just kind of wander out a little bit, shoot something, and then come back to where it was supposed to be at. That way you can kind of use it in multitude of different ways. We might build a controller for this. You can kind of control that behavior remotely. Maybe you can tell it, hey, return to me, stay still, give it some kind of command system. But for this video, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and get everything set up and we'll get as much done as possible. And that way we can kind of go about, I don't know, doing more stuff. Now this will end up being an armory mod, even though we don't have armory updated for the latest version. But we'll go ahead and kind of label as army mod. We're just going to call it RAWR because that's basically what it's modeled after. It's modeled after the Modern Warfare or Call of Duty. I don't know which game. I don't quite remember what this comes from. I think it's even exists in the Battlefield games. So remote controlled gun drone is what this will be. We do plan to end up doing a whole bunch of add-ons for it, but the initial version, because I do not have armory updated, is going to be incredibly simplistic. And let me edit this repository name. I don't know why I put a dash in the front of it. I think it was because it needs to replace that other bracket, and I'm just going to go ahead and rename it again. That way it's a little bit more straightforward. And then we're going to clone this down. So you're going to see the whole process of how I go through make a mod, not just a simple of like I already have stuff done or I already have stuff started. So when you make a mod, first thing you always want to do, get yourself set up with some kind of source control system. I recommend GitHub. Bitbucket's another option. There's also GitLabs. There's a few other popular ones. Git is what all these use though, so it's an actual system for keeping track of your changes, keeping track of your files, keeping track of what you're doing with the project. I have another mod that we're probably going to work on here. I'll probably do this one during the stream later today if things go well, because I still have to do that job interview, and if I'm motivated after that job interview, we're definitely going to do more. If I'm not, we'll see how things go. Anyways, so we get that set up, get the project set up. You can do the readme in here. It's not really that important. If you don't set up the readme, you can still clone the project down. It just means you're going to have a, if you set up the readme, you're going to have an initial commit already set up. I'm going to clone this in here. I'm going to put this in the armory folder. I need to really badly get in the habit of organizing my folders. If you don't have a folder structure already set up like I do, I recommend setting this one up as well. Oh yeah, so they couldn't find the folder, so let's go ahead and get that set up. So I have a GitHub folder. I try very hard to keep somewhat organized with this, but you can tell it's a mess. I recommend if you're going to seriously get into development and you're not just going to do Minecraft mods, even if you're just doing Minecraft mods, try to figure out some kind of system. I recommend not doing what I'm doing right now and create a single folder for this. I recommend create a GitHub. In that GitHub, create a folder called Minecraft or Minecraft Forge or something. Put all of your stuff in there and then separate it by version. That much I do recommend. I recommend trying to keep your stuff version sorted as much as possible. This will help you in the long run because you will be updating your mod over multiple versions if you keep up with it. I recommend also when it comes to with your mod, if you ever do update to a new version, try to make a new branch for that version. So anybody who's coming in looking at your code, or if you need help, or if somebody requests that you bug fix something for an older version, you have that availability because you kept a branch of your other thing. Also try to tag your stuff as well. So something you could do really cool with this stuff is you can actually set up tags. I think you do it through this page. No, you don't do it through here. I'll show how to do that in another video. But you can do that and you can tag your releases and everything else. If you get in the source control, you can automate all that process, but we'll talk about that in another video. So we got this folder. I want to make a folder in here called Armory so I can keep when we start updating the Armory mod, we start working on it because we're going to have a lot of content packs for this. I want to try to keep this stuff somewhat organized. I did the same thing for my SBM mods. They're all in one folder. Even though I still prefix them all that way, that's kind of, they're all in that one folder. I need to definitely clean this up. Phone calls. Yeah, I submitted my resume to like 50 different places, so if that phone goes off a lot during this video, I apologize, but I'm not going to turn it on silent in case there's an actual important call I need to get. But we got a folder here, so let's try cloning that again. So up here, clone, put the URL in there, then I can switch this to 112. It's defaulting to 1.7 because that's what I've got it set up to default to. You can change the default in the settings at some point. So we want to clone it to this. This will make a folder inside the Armory folder called armory.raw. You can then click open now and it will show that initial commit we just made. And now we need to actually get the project set up. Now, I take the easy way to setting stuff up, and I think I know exactly who that is calling to. There's this company that keeps spam calling me, and they'll call again, send me a text message, send me an email, then call again. And it's like, I'm definitely not replying to you if you're going to spam me like that. As badly as I need a job, your company doesn't speak very well if that's what happens. Anyway, so we get this folder structure set up here. So what I end up almost always doing is I just take one of my other mods and copy everything else. I'll explain what everything does when we copy it. So let's try to figure out which one of these. And you know what? I'm actually not going to copy this one since I just started the item recovery one. I know the files in here are a little bit nicer, so I'm going to copy these here. So I've got the settings.gradle. You don't really need this if you're doing your own Gradle stuff. I have this because we have some legacy code. I also have 2 helper scripts that I'm going to copy. I have a Gradle property script, which is also optional. If you're doing your own Gradle stuff, you don't really need this. The build.gradle, you do need one of these. You do need the gradle.bat, gradle.w, and you also will need the Gradle folder. You also need the source folder too, but I'm going to go ahead and construct this just to show you guys how you lay everything out. There's a specific style you want to lay your stuff out. You don't have to really do it this way. Really, when it even comes to the Gradle stuff is somewhat optional. If you can find another way to build your stuff, you can go with that. It is recommended to do Gradle because this is the standard at the moment for building stuff. It used to be ANT, there used to be other ways to do it. Gradle script folders, this is kind of the one I use. I have a very specialized one. This is the reason why I'm not going to talk about this in detail, is the Gradle scripts we do use are very unique to all the projects I work on. And they're not something that you can just take on your own and use them because they are not probably going to function properly. Because we do a lot of stuff, for example, of tagging all of our jar files with who built it, like built by, so this will tag the system it was built by or user, created by, JVM, stuff like that. So it'll tag a whole bunch of information, so that way if somebody goes and gets our file and they send it back to us and go, hey, it's broken, we can look at exactly what the code was, exactly the project versions, we can look at a whole bunch of other information, so we do all that. But for the most part, some of the stuff is still the same. You still set up your kind of repositories. There's a little bit different way you can do this. You set up your plugins. You don't need all of these. A lot of these some of these are unique. The only ones you really, I think, need, there should be, well, actually, don't really need any of these. All of these are just really unique to our stuff. Of course, if you need dependency, you can set up here. You do want to set this, though. This a lot of stuff is compiled against 1.8 right now for Java. This is the Java version, not the Minecraft version. You set your Minecraft version and your Forge versions other places. The reason why we have scripts here, if I actually click this right now, you'll see that this applies a whole bunch of other files. This is the reason I don't recommend using my build Gradle. You guys can go use the Forge standard one, which is really good. Or you can go grab different versions. I do have to change a few things for my script though, so I have to go into Gradle property and I have to change the name of everything else. So the archive would be armory.rawr, and we just do this here. This is unique to our build server. This is not used by, like, well, I think these are actually used by the localized build process. I also have that git hash that I need to grab, which is this little number here. This just is used for our changelog system, so it'll when our automated system pushes files up to CurseForce automatically, it will try to build a changelog for us. It's not a very good changelog. This is something like when you're committing to Git, you kind of want to think about if you're going to use some kind of automated system for this. Try to make your commits legible and understandable and simple, so that way when a user comes through and sees that changelog, they can go, oh yeah, you fixed this bug, you fixed that bug, you added this feature, rather than seeing what some people do is go commit number 50 or something, and that's completely unusable information. But yeah, so I gotta change that stuff, and then there's one more file I gotta change, which I think I've been told I don't need this one anymore, but I keep adding it anyways because I'm not 100% sure and I don't really care to have to fix things later. This, I think, is almost purely used by our build system, is what that file was used for. So that's basic files. This is your build system files. There's a reason I grab all these first, because you need these to get the project to set up properly. I will sync these by themselves, so I will actually go in here and go like init build files. So I get those submitted. And then we want our source folder. So when it comes to source folder, you go source. You then want a main folder. If you plan to do any type of integration with other mods, you'll want an API folder in here. And if you plan to do any like testing, you'll want a, like, I believe it's called test or tests, I think. Let's actually check one of our other mods just to confirm this. So we're going to go ICBM Classic, source. Yeah, there it goes, main folder. I don't have test in here. And it'll go Java and resources. And the Java folder is where you stick your actual code. Resource folder, you stick your assets. So you'll have all these files in here. In the assets folder is where you stick your package that matches your name of your or ID of your mod, which is ICBM Classic for this mod and everything else. So let's go back out, and we want to go back into this folder. Source, main, and then we'll do our resources folder. And there's a certain order how this stuff needs to be set up. And this is Java. If you do other languages, you want to name your file a different way, although I've been told you can stick everything in the Java folder and it works just the same because it's the way they set their scripts up. And then you do your package names. So package names can be whatever you want to be. The standard is that you want to do a reverse domain name. So if you have a website for your project or whatever, in my case I have com.builtbroken, you want to do the reverse of that. So you want to go, since mine's com.builtbroken, or builtbroken.com, I'm going to go com.builtbroken. And then I'm going to do the name of the project. In this case, since it's an Armory mod, I'm actually going to do Armory, and then I'm going to do another package in here, card RAWR. There really is no reason to have to do this. It's just, it's a convention or a standard. It's something that people do because it helps organize the packages. It helps identify kind of who worked on the code. So somebody comes in my code and looks at it, they go, oh yeah, it was made by the BuiltBroken team. And they can go, oh yeah, this is part of the Armory project and everything else. So they can kind of get that idea. And then in here, we'll stick a whole bunch of code here in a bit. First, we want to get the resource package. Let me make sure I spelled that right. I can't remember if it's resource or resources, even though we just looked at it. Resources, and then it's asset. I'm actually going to grab one of these other mods real quick, and I'm going to copy, because Item Recovery doesn't have any assets in it, but I did set up most of the packages for it, so that way I don't have to type everything in. But there is an order to which these have to be named, because this is what Minecraft's going to be looking for. When it comes to this source folder, this is one of the Maven standards, I believe, of source code pathing, and it has an order it looks for. You can program your build scripts to look for any file format you want to, but at that point you're getting into more advanced stuff, and it's not really worth the time and effort for somebody who's new. So I don't recommend going into it. I need to change this. So this, we're going to probably call the mod armory.rawr, so I'm going to just do lowercase all that. When you do your mod IDs, they need to be lowercase, and then of course you have a folder. So there's, when it comes to stuff, there's a block state folder, laying, models, recipes, and textures. These are standardized, and in each of these you got blocks and items. Block states, you can just stick anything. There's already block state in there, so exclude that. And then laying, which I need to go ahead and remove everything out of this. We're going to end up probably piggybacking one of the other tabs, so we won't have a creative tab. The rest of this looks good. So that's all straightforward, so we don't need to clean anything else here. And then we double check to make sure, yeah, there's some textures still left in here, so let's go ahead and clean those out. That's the only downside to copy and pasting stuff. If you ever get into this and you want to make a whole bunch of mods, I do recommend making a template mod package, getting that synchronized up at GitHub so you can just clone it down. I think I do have one myself, but of course I like to do things weird and do stuff in a little bit unconventional way. So that gets us down to just a lang file, and that's good because we just want to go ahead and get the project set up. So to do the project, I'm going to run this build script. This build script, if we edit it, just runs a Gradle W clean. Clean will clean out all the extra junk. Set up decomp workspace will set up the workspace, and then it'll tell it, hey, I want to set up an IntelliJ workspace, and then I want you to generate some run configs for that thing. I also do refresh dependencies, so that makes sure to actually download some dependencies and stuff. I think that part actually makes it slower. Same with the clean one, it makes it run slower, but you're only supposed to be running this every time you update files. So if you decide you want to go from Forge version something to the newest version, you would want to rerun this again, or you would want to manually go in and change your Forge version. That is an option, by the way. You can manually do a lot of this stuff. You are not required to have a build system, although it is recommended, because if you don't have one, you're probably not going to get your jar to build properly. This will take a little bit to run. It depends on the speed of your computer. My computer is hit or miss on how fast it is. It's not the greatest thing. So I'm running on like an AMD processor that's somewhere between an i3 and an i5 for Intel. So it's not the slowest thing in the world, but it's also not fast by any margin of that. I think this also does depend on your hard drive speed, your RAM speed. My RAM speed is also really bad. Hard drive is not too bad. I believe this is sitting on my SSD when it comes to a lot of this stuff. This actual drive right here, which we were putting everything in, is an HHD drive, so it's a platter, just old school disk drive. So it's not really this that's slowing stuff down, but all the Gradle stuff is on my main drive. So when it actually comes to this, when it actually is building your Gradle stuff, I'll show kind of how this works to some extent. When it downloads files, so you see it downloading all the plugins over here and everything else. This will download these to a folder in your user folder. It depends on your operating system, and that just broke here. We'll get to that in a second, but I want to show this really quick. It'll create a .gradle folder, and it'll download a whole bunch of stuff to this .gradle folder. It is also kind of important that when you're working and stuff, to keep in mind that if you do want to clean some stuff out, this folder does get pretty sizable. Actually, that's pretty small. Weird. That should have a ton of files in it. It may not be scanning properly. But this will download a whole bunch of stuff. It'll download all the Minecraft stuff to a Minecraft folder. Then if I go, I think Forge is in here. It'll download all the Forge stuff in here, so you'll do all your Forge stuff in here, and then it'll scatter the rest of the files, so you'll see a ton of other files in here. They're not, I think, all in here. I think it's actually, yeah, here's where they are. So they're in module 2, and then it'll download stuff. So you can see I've got the COFH stuff in here already downloaded. I've got a ton of stuff. I've even got some of my own BuiltBroken stuff in here. So I've got multiple versions of Volts Engine down in here and everything else. So when you run build scripts, it does download stuff. It does cache stuff. If you're running in a hard drive space, this is probably one of your #1 places to go clean out. If you do clean this out, you will have to rebuild your workspace, though, because it'll break all the links and everything. Let's figure out why this script failed. Probably failed because it just couldn't download something. It's probably what ended up happening. If you end up getting a script fail, you can actually go into one of these Gradle folders and usually get a thing. Apparently, it didn't generate a log, so let's try to run this again. We might just be missing a file. If this doesn't generate a log after it crashes this time, I'll show you a trick to get it to get somewhat of a log going. It is downloading stuff. I do think I need to get rid of that refresh dependency thing at the end. It is useful to have the refresh dependency because if you have like some bad dependencies or something, it does help clean them up. At least that's what my understanding of it. Keep in mind when I do say some of this stuff, I'm not 100% on the build process. Dmod, who works with us, usually does all the build scripts for me. That's the reason why you see me copy and paste them, is I really don't like working on them, even though I do somewhat comprehend them. Apparently we're using the wrong mappings. That's not that big of a deal, so... I thought I updated these, but I guess Dmod might have flipped them back to a more stable branch, which is fine. It's targeting the right version, so it'll tell you when the build script version, if you pay attention to what's going on. So say, hey, you're using this version of Forge, which is not the latest, they just released a new one. It'll tell me what version of Minecraft I'm running, which I guess that build number is the date being built, so 2018-10-05. Yeah, that's the date. Okay. It'll tell me what Java version I'm using. I'm behind on that as well. I believe it's printing the Forge version twice. I think it's printed by R scripts, just as a confirmation to make sure that what we're seeing is the same thing. Then it'll, of course, tell you all this stuff, and it'll tell you nicely all the people that worked on it. So you got Sarge here, who works for Mojang now. I think even Prof Mobius works for Mojang now as well. You'd be amazed how many people who end up working on MCP end up actually going and working on other stuff. So it looks like it's working. So it's getting assets. So this is where it's going to download stuff. I think now it's doing... Might be doing the IntelliJ Pro. No, it's still decompiling all our files for us. This is the part where usually when I make these videos, I usually do the streams, I try to do all this stuff first, is because this part right here, just getting the project set up, can take you a bit of time, and it can be pretty frustrating if it breaks and stuff. This time it looked like it ran. I think the first time what happened is it just didn't get a dependency properly, so it was like, hey, I misplaced a dependency. If you have issues with building, before even looking at your scripts, before even trying to see what's wrong with the stuff, sometimes just rerun it. And if you can't get it to run after maybe 3 times, then look at something. Go see if there's something wrong. But yeah, that'll generate some stuff, and of course it'll generate a whole bunch of junk. You're going to want to, of course, get into tree view here, and you're going to want to ignore everything in build. Ignore stop tracking. You're going to ignore everything in .gradle. You don't want to sync files that you do not need. And a lot of people do this, especially when working on new mods, is that you don't want to sync a lot of stuff. So my stuff generates a whole bunch of crap that I don't sync, but then people who end up building with the Forge template set will end up syncing a lot of stuff. You only want to sync the files that you cannot live without. So if you cannot get these files again, don't sync them. So I don't need any of these IML files. I do want that. I do want the source folder. So usually when you sync stuff to GitHub, you want your source folder, you want your build scripts, you want your ignore files, you want any of your assets. Syncing assets to Git is a good thing. If somebody tells you it's wrong, ignore them, because even though Git is not designed for binaries, it has no problem with them, and you want to make sure you have a source control on all your assets. So if you decide you want to go from one asset to the other, but then decide maybe 2 months later you want to go back and you don't have that copy, you can just search back through GitHub and grab your old assets again and grab them, and they're there, they're safe, and new stuff. So I still recommend backing your assets on something like Dropbox or Google Drive. It's very useful. With that opened up, we now have this. I prefer to go to package view when using IntelliJ, and this will actually get everything set up for me. So I have this in here, and what I need to do, the first thing you want to do when making a new mod, go ahead and create a brand new class. Name that class after your mod name. It doesn't really matter really what you end up calling it, just don't call it mod. It's really annoying, especially if you call it mod, you're going to have issues with imports later, so preferably don't do that. So I'm just going to call this RAWR because that's basically what the name of the mod is, and we want to do a mod thing here. There's a reason why I say don't name your mod is you're going to have to implement an annotation at the top. This annotation, it basically just tells FML that this is the mod class and needs to load it. It also gives a whole bunch of basically data you need to put in here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open another project real quick and just copy out of the top of it the whole bunch of data out of the top of it. I'll explain what this information is, but I just like to do it this way because then I don't have to remember off the top of my head all the stuff I need, and I don't have to type it in because preferably I try to reduce how much typing I do just because of arthritis in my fingers. But you want to have this up here, so you see this at the top of the atomic science thing. I also grab all of this stuff up here. This is some generic stuff that I almost always use between all my mods. What this ends up being is this is the domain name. It used to be called domain, it's now called, I believe, package or something like that. This is basically your mod ID. This is what you identify to Forge as what your unique ID of your mod is. You want to set this, you never want to change it, ever. For no reason, and the only time you ever want to change this is if, for example, you took the mod ID of somebody else and they had it first, then you're going to want to change it. If you have some kind of simplified name, I also recommend prefixing it with maybe your organization name or something. I do this for all the SMB mods, so if I release a Wooden Shears mod, it goes SMB Wooden Shears because I know somebody else will eventually release a Wooden Shears mod. So unless you have some simple stuff, which this one we're probably going to do that as well, is we're going to prefix it. It's going to be Armory and RAWR, which we need to do anyways because this domain name needs to match your asset domain name as well. This is what is used to find all your assets. This is what is used to register all your stuff. So when you register a block, an item, an entity, it'll be prefixed with this. So you need to make sure that this is what you want to use or whatever. But we'll do that. Let me go ahead and copy the other part of this. Another good reason why to keep stuff on GitHub is you can actually copy your stuff off GitHub too if you need to. So you want this. We're going to have to rename some things though because we just copied and pasted. I don't really recommend copying and pasting though, so if you can avoid doing this, get in the habit of avoiding doing it. I'm doing it purely because I don't like typing in stuff. And then this we're going to call the name. So with the name you can basically use whatever you want. Try to keep it appropriate. Just keep in mind that most people that play Minecraft are under the age of 18, so don't put anything weird or stupid in here. And keep in mind that whatever this name is showing is what people are going to end up using. So people are going to probably call this the RAWR mod. I'm probably going to get some jokes about this too because this is a noise that is made by an animal. So yeah. So copy that stuff. You want to make sure you have a logger in your mod. If you're doing some cool stuff, you might want to have a development tag here. It's a really cool property you can implement, so I'm going to copy some of this stuff here. Instance thing, this is optional. Creative tab optional. Proxies are optional. We need a proxy though, so I'm going to be copying a lot of this stuff. We're not going to have a creative tab. I'm just going to use the weapons tab because I don't really need a creative tab. And plus, when we update the armory mod, we're going to use the armory mod's creative tab. This is our proxy. I'll show you what this does in a second as soon as I'm done copying a few other things. So I don't need this. I do need this because we'll need to register a GUI handler at some point. And right now, the only place I know to do a GUI handler is in the pre-init. I don't need any of the other ones as far as I know. We are going to need a few other things, and I'm going to keep this mod straightforward, so we're not going to do what I do in other mods. If you've seen a tutorial before, a lot of tutorials recommend you create a package called like ASet items. This is something I've only gotten the habit of doing recently. I used to do it all in the main mod class. So there is no real reason to do it a set way. If you feel like you want to do it one way versus another, go for it. It's all about your style. Just keep in mind you want to keep your code as clean as possible. So if you make a really large mod, I recommend having at least one of these style classes or multiple. So if you have, for example, we start getting to this point, like, for example, I got so much stuff in here, I'm almost even thinking about getting a separate class and start registering maybe all the basic items separate from the item blocks or whatever. So the only reason we're in here is because I need a copy of this here. So we're going to need a registry method here. When it comes to doing events, by the way, since a lot of people don't understand this front part here, you can call this whatever you want. You can literally call this, and this will work perfectly fine. The only thing that matters is Forge wants to see this. Forge is looking for this part. So it's going to go, hey, I'm looking for anything that has a subscribe button here. I'm then going to go look at that method, and I'm going to go, hey, what are you looking for? I'm looking for the registry event for items, and it's going to give you the registry event of items. You also need to make this static if you are using the annotation up here, which should be up here. If you use this annotation right here, then you have to make it static. If it's not static and you don't want to make it static, you will then, say something like pre-init or even your constructor, have to register that class file so that way it does it. I recommend using this here because this is a much better version. If this is on your main mod class, you do not need the mod ID. If it is not on your main class, you do need to provide the mod ID. If it's client-side stuff, you need to specify what side you want it to load on. By default, it will load on both client and server. Make sure if you're doing client stuff, you put all of your client stuff in its own little folder or own little thing that loads separately. This is because the server, if you're running a dedicated server, does not load any client code. If you're running a local server, say on your client, and you set up, say, like a LAN server, it doesn't matter, but can cause issues. So it's a very good idea not to do that. So we got that here, and I'm just going to copy this again and just do the block one. I do recommend, if you end up doing this though, even though these two methods will end up being different enough that Java will let them compile. Actually, it's not going to let that because it's, when it comes to generics, by the way, when it compiles, it's going to do that. So it's not going to remember what that is. So you're going to want to rename these different. We may not end up with any blocks. We are going to end up with entities. And the thing is, I don't think Atomic Science has any entities, so I'm going to have to open up another mod to go grab the entity information. I'm actually going to close this one and I'm going to go open a GitHub. So I'm going to show you kind of like GitHub. So we have tons of repositories. It's a really good idea to keep your code, even if you think it's bad, if you think it's horrible. It doesn't really matter. Keep all of your code because it's really useful to be able to look back and go, hey, I was working on such and such mod a couple months ago and I did such and such cool little thing in it. And we can go in here and actually go copy that information. So in Mirpig, which is one of my simpler mods, which is where I was talking about, if you're doing a simple mod, just put everything in the mod class. It doesn't matter because I only registered one item here. This is what I was looking for, is the register entity part, because we're going to be making an entity, so we're going to need this part. And yeah, we're going to need our proxies. So when it comes to proxies, you don't really need much. I'm going to make a package for the client proxy, but I'm going to leave the main proxy in the main folder. So in here, we're going to make a thing called client proxy. The whole concept behind the proxies is you're trying to set up a system where, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, because I don't have a good way to define proxy, but you can think of it as two different versions of something, and you're using that version to proxy or to pass through the events that you want to run based on the side you're on. So if you're on the server, you want to have one for the server. If you're on the client, you want to have one on the client. Very commonly, you end up calling something common proxy, and you'll end up implementing something like your IGUI handler on it. The reason why IGUI handler is commonly implemented on your proxy is because you usually want to make sure that the server or your LAN has access to the server GUI stuff, but you do not want the server to have access to your client GUI stuff. So in this case, this will go in the client proxy, and you would have a version of that. And you would implement all of your stuff for that into the client proxy. That's the recommended way to do it. You can get away with having a single GUI handler that then does everything in this package here. It's not recommended for the reason that you can end up with issues with loading and everything else. So you want to make sure you try to keep things separate, because it does improve the quality and the robustness of your code if you make sure everything's separated. So put that in there. There's other things we'll end up doing with this, like we'll end up registering all of our models probably in the client proxy down here, but we'll get that in a bit. Actually, I'll probably even do what I normally do. I'm just going to make a file called client reg, and we'll end up doing all of our render stuff in here. And let me go dig stuff up. We don't need a spawn egg here, so I'm going to make sure I keep this code file open. I'm going to put this in our folder here, but then I'm going to back out one layer on the other one, and we're going to go into the... Did we not even have a client? I guess we just put the client registry in the main folder. So this is what is client registry here. This is what I was talking about. You need to put that domain up there. Make sure your site is client. The reason you want to do this way is that when Forge or FML goes to look for stuff and it sees that you only want to load client side and you're loading server side, it'll ignore this entire class file for you, which is really useful. And you want to pass in your domain, because if you don't tell it what this belongs to, it will not load properly, and you can have issues with loading, and you can break your stuff, and it may just flat out ignore it. We're going to pull over register models in here. This is the way I recommend doing it, because this ensures that all of your models are only being loaded client side, and you don't have an issue where stuff is getting called incorrectly, or that if somebody ran reflection on your class by mistake, it crashes. Because if somebody runs reflection and they're iterating over all the methods, and this method existed, and they hit this I believe is a, well, I guess it's not a client-side only method, but if it was a client-side only method, say it had something like @side on it or something, it would go missing class exception, it would crash. Because a lot of the client stuff is not loaded client-side. We'll get that right there. I don't think we're going to have any blocks, so I'm going to go ahead and comment that out just so it's not trying to load that method. We do want to make sure this is set up here, so this is going to need to be armory.rawr. So you want to make sure this matches your package up here. So this will be your package up here. It'll be at the top of the class. In this case, we're looking for the client one. So in the client package, we're looking for client proxy, which is right there. We need to do the same thing for our common proxy. Our common proxy is just going to be in the basic folder. I have it called server proxy for atomic science, but this needs to match. You don't need to put the .class or .jar at the end of this. It'll do that for you automatically. This is going to look for that file. This is going to look for that file. And based on what side you're on, so if you're on the client or the server, it's going to load that into this little instance field here. And then we just need to register this, which is, I believe, is done... Actually, I don't remember how that's done. Maybe network. They still have a network handler. Hey, we're going to have to open... I think it's actually this one here. That's registered channel. So this is what does OpenGUI. Okay, we're going to have to open up the other one just really quickly. I don't have a lot of this stuff memorized off the top of my head because you implement it once and you never touch it again. So open this up and it'll be right there at the top of the class file once it opens. Or if the file's even open at all. Ah, so it's network registry.instance. So I was close that it was network registry. It wasn't the FML network registry, but I was close to what it was called. So you want to register this. This registers GUI handler. You want to make sure you pass in your mod instance so it knows what mod you're registering to, and then you want to pass in your handler. Of course, as I said, you can make your handler a single class file. You can make it a proxy. It doesn't matter what. Really, what you're doing is you're just telling it, hey, I need to be able to handle the GUI, so that way when you send a packet, that then opens a GUI for your machine. FML knows what mod to send that packet to, what mod's handler to use, and everything else. So it knows how to handle all that stuff for you. It'll then, of course, call these methods up here, which will then instantiate your GUIs, which we'll get to later. That's not something we're going to get to right away, but I wanted to make sure it was set up. That way we can go right into using it. Now, first thing we're going to need, one, we're going to want to make a content package. I recommend making a content package just to keep your stuff separate, because what you end up doing after you get a mod certain size, you end up having a content package, you end up having a config package, and then you'll probably end up, if you're one of those people who likes to reuse code, you end up with a lib package. We probably won't even need that, because I don't think we're going to have a lot of reusable code. We will have a config package because we're going to want to configure the damage levels, we're going to want to configure the rate of fire of this sentry gun, we're going to want to configure its HP values, everything else. In the content package, it's up to you how you want to handle this. Because we're not going to have a lot of content, I'm just going to throw everything in the content package. If you plan to have multiple items, I recommend doing what I do over here with Atomic Science, and let me go ahead and cancel here just so I can show this off, is in your content package, start making a package per thing you're doing. So if you have a generic blocks, you can just make a block package. If you have some generic armor stuff, armor package, commands, so on. And down here, if you want to do machines, I recommend doing something like this. You have the machine package, and you have even maybe a sub-package for all your processing machines, and so on and so on. That way you stay organized. That's the whole purpose of the package system, is to keep it as organized as possible. If you really don't care, you can dump everything in the same package and make it impossible for somebody else to read your code. Okay, so let's go over here. We're going to need an item class. So this will be item... what to call this? We'll just call it item RAWR. We're going to extend item. We really don't need a lot of ability out of this. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up making this work exactly like the spawn egg. The reason why we're just not using the spawn egg system is I want to use a nice little icon that looks like the drone, so and make it look a little nice and pretty. We're going to make a constructor in this. The only reason we're going to do the constructor is so we can set the creative tab and set the registry name and stuff. So I want this to show up on the combat tab. I then want to set its register name. If you register a block, you are going to need to make sure you register its name. There are a couple options to do this. By default, if you pass in a name, it's going to prefix your mod ID to it. Personally, I like to prefix my mod ID to the front of it just so it doesn't have to work extra hard. So I end up using a prefix. That's the reason why I have this prefix variable, which all it is the domain with a colon here. That's because when you go to register this, if you register this, what it'll do is it'll try to check your prefix here. And when it checks the prefix, it'll try to see if you have this in here. If you don't have that in there, it'll then grab the active mod container. It will then build that prefix for you, and then it will shove it on the front of your stuff. It does this regardless of what you do, so the reality is you really don't need to do this. This was pointed out to me by somebody else. So we call this RAWR, we'll call it RAWR spawner. This will be probably replaced by something else here later when we get the armory mod updated, but that's not that big of a deal. We'll do a video on that maybe later if I get around to it. So you set the registry name, and then you want to set your translation key. And your translation key is almost always going to be identical to your registry name, at least when it comes to my methodology of doing things. I like to put the prefix on here, and the reason I like to do this is that if another mod ends up using a similar name as your system, you don't have overlap, because when all of the keys are loaded up into the lang file up here, they're going to have a lot of overlap. When you do get the lang key, though, it's literally just going to be whatever you're put in there. It's going to be prefixed with item if it's an item, it's going to be prefixed with tile if it's a tile, and then it's going to be whatever that name is you set in there for your mod. And if we do that my system, then it's going to be this letter here. Then dot name, and you do equal. If you've got a plugin like I do have a plugin installed for IntelliJ for Minecraft mods. It's what actually is making a lot of the stuff nice and bright, and it's also what's giving it that little icon to say it's a Minecraft language file. And it does highlighting for me, does some error checks and everything else. So this is going to be RAWR. Yeah, we're just going to call it RAWR because we don't really need to say it's a RAWR spawner. We're just going to say the RAWR because in your inventory that is the inventory version of that object. We'll then add some tooltips to it later and everything else. Actually, we can do that right now. So we can add information. I usually type in the methods to find stuff. There are other ways to do this. Just make sure you also delete it out here. It's going to error out. Always a good idea, by the way, to know where to look for stuff. You also want to put add override above any method that you override from another class file, so if it comes from up here. But yeah, know where to look for things at, so where to find all stuff. You go through the class file. What you can do is hover, click on this and hit Control B, and it will open this file up for you in IntelliJ. Eclipse and NetBeans both have their own versions of this if you're using that software. So you get that, and then when it comes to adding information, it's pretty simple. You basically will just add stuff to this file here. So we're going to go tooltip.add, and then we would do like I18N, I believe is what we want to do. It's the translation system. Then you want to format it, or actually, there's format and there's hasKey. I guess we just want format. We don't really care about anything else. And then we're going to do get unlocalized, get translation key .info. That's what we really want to do. We want to make sure to do that, and what we will do up here is we can copy this because that's our translation key. It puts .name at the end of it for actually getting the name of it. With .info, and this will be places a RAWR drone on the ground. So that, really simple, tells people what that item is. We can add more information to it later. We can basically say, okay, what's its HP, how much ammo does it have? If we decide to do some systems where you can pick the drone back up, it goes in your inventory and keeps all of its ammo and upgrades and everything else, we can do that, but we don't really care about that right now. We do need to make it to spawn. Before we even get to that, I'm going to go ahead and create an entity class here, so we'll call this entity RAWR. And we're going to extend... I'm going to extend entity woof real quick. I'm not going to continue doing that because I don't need a lot of code from this. I'm going to keep it open because there's some of these tasks I need to remake. Particularly, I need entity AI owner target. I need some of this other stuff here. We will likely have to remake a lot of this stuff because some of this stuff is very dependent on things like entity tameable, which we are probably, I don't know, we can extend entity tameable. Let me take a look at this. We're not really an animal, but yeah, we're gonna have to take a look at this. This is some stuff that I'm gonna have to read through because it's been a while since I made tameable animals. I don't really want to make it an animal because our drone doesn't grow, it can't get in love, it doesn't age. We might extend creature though. The reason we'll extend creature is because some of this stuff is pretty good, and we can use this home position to our advantage by making it where the drone will return back to its home spot when it's not following the player. That being said, I can remake that stuff. It's not gonna have a fleeing speed, so we're gonna just extend probably entity living. But do we even need a lot of this stuff? We are going to need the move and look helpers, so we need those. Our drone will jump, unfortunately, there's just no way around that. Unless we want to make the drone not be able to navigate whatsoever with the player. We definitely want the AI tasks and target tasks and stuff, so yeah, we're going to want to extend entity living. Because if we've extended entity living base, we do get a lot of stuff in here, but we don't get a lot of the stuff we need. It's useful to extend entity living base if you're going to make your own AIs that do not use the Mojang AI system, but if you want to use the Mojang AI system, you're going to want to extend entity living. So we'll do that. That's going to, of course, make us implement a ton of stuff, so we'll go ahead and implement that. Right now, we're just going to focus on getting the creature to spawn, so we're just going to do that kind of stuff. We do need to register it, so let's go ahead and copy the registry code. That's the reason why I wanted to keep this file open, but I guess it's going to error out on me. Why is it not saying it can find it all of a sudden? I guess we'll have to go back out of package here and go back in here. It's probably like an extra space in it. So to do registry system, you have to use the entity builder. It's a little weird. I personally don't like how this works, but I've been told this is the way to do it. I really do try to stay with some of the standards unless there is a reason why I don't want to keep with them. We'll keep the woof open though, because our goal, of course, is to make this work like a woof to start with. Then in later versions, we're going to make it more sophisticated, more intelligent, do better things. When it comes to entity builder though, you create the entity builder. You then want to give it a name, and in this case we're going to call it a RAWR. You then want to give it an ID. The ID and name are separate from each other. They are not the same thing. This is what is going to be translated. This is what is going to be registered. And in this case also you can just put 0 here because this is just a network ID. You just want to make sure that each of your entities has its own network ID, so it's getting its packets to its own little thing. I think it's how it works. That's how it was explained to me. I do not think that is actually correct now I'm thinking about it. You want to send your velocity packets. You want to say, okay, how far away can I see the entity? How often do I want to have packets and stuff? This actually isn't the render thing. This is just like, if you're within a certain distance, should you be sending packets to everything else? Somebody ringing my doorbell. I'm not getting it. It's probably just mail. Unfortunately, my dog is going to bark. Why is going on? Gotta love picking times to do recordings and everything's going on. So we get that going here. We aren't going to have an egg. We're not going to have anything else. So the last thing we just need to do is run this little piece of code right here. This is what actually registers it. And no, I don't want to do any of that. So you run all this stuff. If you were spawning your entity, you would run this whole spawn code section, but we don't need that. We're not going to have it spawn in the world. So that's what registers it. And that should register our entity. We should have an entity that will be spawnable, will work. Now we don't have any render code, so what it's going to do, in theory, I hope it doesn't turn invisible. I hope it gives us a little white cube to show us what the size of our entity is. If it turns out not, we can really quickly register some shapes and stuff. So we'll go ahead. So yeah, we just need to register the item here. We don't really need the item reference, so what we're going to do to register the item is do event, get registry, register, new item RAWR. That should register, get it registered to the game. We don't have any render for it, so we're not going to render stuff in it. What we do to get the render going is... Actually, it's a really good question. So we want to do... I guess we are going to want to make a reference to it. So public static final item RAWR. We're going to set this to null. The reason we're going to do this is we're going to use the object holder system. I'm not 100% familiar with the object system, so it's a little complicated to me. But the ideal is you would set up, you have two options. You can make a class file and you can put this on the entire class file and just make this match your registry name. Or you can do what I'm about to do, which is just create a reference to exactly what you're looking for and just use that, which is the option I like to use. So this should, in theory, if everything goes well, should initialize to the correct object. I don't think there's anything else we need to do. Let's read the code here for this. Automatically populate public static field entries with registry value. I don't think we need to do anything else. If used on a class, this only represents the mod ID. If used on a field, it represents a name which can be abbreviated or complete. Abbreviated names derive their mod ID from the enclosed object holder at class level. So yeah, we just want to do the whole string because it'll work that way. So that will initialize with that. And then in the client registry, what we will do to make sure we at least register the fact that we want a model is you just do event. Actually, we don't even need the event. We need to run another piece of code. Yeah, we want this piece of code here. Run that. So we want to do RAWR.itemRAR, meta value 0 because we only have one thing here. Then we want to grab its registry name because what you're doing is you're registering that this item and this is technically your path. So if you decide you don't want to use the registry name as your path, you can use whatever. And then your variant is going to be inventory, unless you want to do something fancy. This will, of course, target the model folder here, and if we make a file in there, which I'm just going to go ahead and grab something real quick just so we have it set up. Go 112, and let's just grab any one of the random mods here that has an item in it. Plant buckets won't work. Trip rail? No, trip rail won't work. I think wooden shears might run with some basic renders. Yep, it runs with really simple renders. And this is going to need to be named the same as your registry name, so in this case we called it RAWR spawner. And then we're going to do that. We're going to just call our texture the same thing. So it's going to look in the items folder for the texture, and this is going to be Armory RAWR. So that's going to get that. And then if we throw a texture in there, which let me just copy one of the shear textures real quick. And we'll put that in the item folder. And we're going to call this RAWR spawner. Go ahead and show an explorer. And I want to open with GIMP. So we'll quickly make a small texture for this. It's really optional to use GIMP. Paint works really well too, but Paint doesn't do alpha transparency. Paint.net does though, if you want to use that. Of course, you can use Photoshop or anything else. It doesn't really matter what program you use. I'm just going to use this really quickly, just so I have something. And we're just going to throw some kind of random shape in here. That way it doesn't look like some randomness. It will look somewhat like our little tank here. That turned yellow for whatever reason. I don't remember what I was texturing last that had yellow in it. I'm surprised I just don't have a really dark color here. So do that. Then we'll change this down to 1 pixel. Something like that going. We'll do like that. So that'll give me my general shape going. And then let's flip up to get a gray here real quick. Is there not a fill bucket anymore? There it is. So I'm going to change that to that. Then use gray for the inside of that tread. Like that. Then we use like a somewhat light gray for the body of the cannon. And then we'll do the actual barrels as like a blackish color. Doesn't quite look right. That looks okay. Let me just make it a little bit different color so it's not the same color of black. Yeah, that gets the message across. And then I'm gonna put like an antenna on the back here, and then we'll put like a red dot on the top of the antenna. I'm gonna put a red dot like right here. Maybe right there. That'll work. And then we'll come through here and we'll make a nicer texture. So that gives me at least my item. That should be translated already. So let's go ahead and run this. When we go to debug the first time, you're going to have to set your modular, unless you have a build script that does that for you. And then we'll be able to run, and it should load up, assuming we didn't break anything else. I'm told apparently you can actually replace this little anvil on the bottom. I saw somebody actually do it. I was hoping they actually were doing something a little bit more advanced, like actually having their own animator down here, but nah. Because I still, one of these days I want to do is get a rocket to go across the top of this. But yeah, one of this, if you are in a dev environment though, to point out, it does take longer to load than it does in an actual environment. It's because you're working with more of a raw code setup, and if you run in debug mode, it's going to be even slower because the actual integrated development environment is tracking all this information over here. It's spitting it all out. There's a lot of stuff that's going on that does slow the game down. So if you see this load slow, keep in mind when you go to load it in an actual game, it's going to be much, much, much faster. We'll go ahead and create a world. You want to make sure you're in creative, obviously. It doesn't matter if you're in a superflat or not. You can get away with stuff. The only reason for a superflat is if you're trying to build something. This should work. We should get an entity that spawns. It's going to do nothing. It should take some damage. I think there's a default HP value. And this should show up on the combat tab. Right there's our little drone. And we didn't make any placement code. But I guess we're going to get to that in the next episode because we've been at this long enough. And I'll see you guys all later and probably do a part 2, 3, maybe even a 4. We'll see how things go.